History has seen bombs bounce off cars, cyanide fail like expired cough syrup, pistols jam twice in a row, and world leaders survive because they stopped to chat for 30 seconds. This video is 44 of the most bizarre assassination attempts ever recorded, where history almost changed forever but didn't because of bad timing, worse planning, or ridiculous luck. These aren't legends. These are real moments where fate slipped on a banana peel. 1. You simply cannot assassinate Andrew Jackson because the universe refuses to allow it. In 1835, a house painter named Richard Lawrence approached the president at a funeral and fired a pistol at his chest. The gun jammed. Lawrence pulled a second pistol. That one jammed too. The odds of two properly loaded flintlock pistols misfiring back-to-back are astronomical, practically a miracle. But here is the punchline. Instead of fleeing, 67-year-old Jackson went into a blind rage and started thrashing the assassin with his hickory cane. The scene was so chaotic that the crowd, including the legendary Davy Crockett, had to tackle the president to stop him from beating the gunman senseless. Jackson had to be physically dragged away, probably shouting that he was just getting started. 2. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand sparked a world war, but the morning of that day was straight out of a slapstick comedy. One conspirator, Nedeljko Kabrinović, threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but he panicked and forgot that grenades have a time delay. It bounced off the convertible roof and exploded under the car behind them. Realizing he had failed, Kabrinović swallowed a cyanide pill and dramatically leaped into the river to drown. Two major problems occurred instantly. The cyanide was expired and only made him vomit, and the river was going through a drought, so it was only 4 inches deep. He just landed with a wet splash in the mud, throwing up on his shoes while the police waded in to arrest him. 3. Assassinating a monarch usually involves hidden daggers or poison, but in 1871, assassins targeting King Milan I of Serbia opted for plumbing. The conspirators sneaked onto his estate and sawed the wooden floorboards of the outdoor royal outhouse. When the king went to use the bathroom, the floor collapsed, plunging him straight into the pit of sewage. It was a literal dirty trick. However, the king survived the foul drop, clung to the wooden edge, pulled out his personal pistol, and fired into the air to call for his guards. He was rescued completely unharmed, extremely angry, and desperately in need of a hot bath. 4. The CIA tried to eliminate Fidel Castro hundreds of times, but the chocolate milkshake plot of 1963 is their magnum opus of failure. The agency managed to get a cyanide pill into the hands of a waiter at the Havana Libre Hotel, where Castro drank a chocolate shake every single day. It was the perfect setup. However, the waiter decided to hide the poison capsule in the kitchen freezer so it would not melt in the Cuban heat. When it was time to serve the drink, the capsule had frozen solid and stuck to the cooling coils. As the waiter tried to chip it off, the capsule ripped open, spilling the poison uselessly inside the fridge. The most powerful intelligence agency on Earth was defeated by a sticky appliance. 5. During World War II, British intelligence debated an unconventional idea regarding Adolf Hitler. Instead of explosives, they considered subtly introducing hormones into his food supply in hopes of affecting his health and public image over time. The proposal never moved beyond theoretical planning stages, partly because gaining reliable access to his meals proved unrealistic. It remains one of the strangest strategic concepts ever drafted on paper, proof that wartime planning sometimes veers into deeply unconventional territory. 6. Most politicians will cancel an event if they have a sore throat, but Theodore Roosevelt gave an 84-minute speech with a fresh bullet hole in his chest. In 1912, a saloon keeper named John Schrank shot Roosevelt at point-blank range in Milwaukee. The bullet passed through his steel eyeglass case and a 50-page folded speech in his pocket before lodging in his ribs. Roosevelt coughed into his hand, saw no blood, and correctly deduced the bullet had not pierced his lung. He refused medical attention, walked on stage, opened his vest to show the crowd the damaged shirt, and casually said that it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. He then delivered the entire speech while his aides panicked in the background. 7. The most ridiculous attempt on Franklin D. Roosevelt did not come from an enemy spy, but from his own navy. In 1943, the president was traveling on the battleship Iowa. The accompanying American destroyer decided to run a torpedo drill to show off. However, the crew forgot to remove the live primer from the torpedo tube. They accidentally fired a fully armed explosive directly at the president's ship. The Iowa had to make a frantic emergency turn to avoid being blown up by its own escort. The torpedo exploded harmlessly in the ship's wake, soaking the deck with water, while the entire crew of the destroyer was immediately placed under arrest for nearly changing history by accident. 8. Queen Isabella II of Spain survived an 1852 assassination attempt simply because Victorian fashion was practically military-grade armor. An angry priest named Father Marino approached the queen and lunged at her stomach with a hidden blade. By all accounts, it should have been a devastating blow. But the queen was wearing a heavy, rigid whalebone corset covered in a thick velvet dress featuring heavy gold embroidery. The weapon hit the elaborate undergarments, slid completely sideways, and only gave her a minor scratch. The attacker was quickly arrested, and the corset went down in history as the world's most glamorous bulletproof vest. 9. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, survived an assassination attempt that looked exactly like a cartoon chase scene. An assassin named Jing Kai pulled a poisoned dagger from a map during a royal presentation. The emperor tried to draw his ceremonial sword to defend himself, but the blade was so long and the scabbard so tight that it got stuck. So, for several awkward minutes, the most powerful man in China ran in circles around a large wooden pillar, while the assassin chased him. It only ended when the royal physician, who was not allowed to carry a weapon, threw his medicine bag at the assassin's face, buying the emperor enough time to finally yank his sword out. 10. King Zog. The first of Albania sounds like a comic book villain, and he certainly fought like one. Zog holds the Guinness World Record for surviving over 50 assassination attempts. But his reaction during a 1931 ambush in Vienna is legendary. As assassins opened fire on him outside an opera house, Zog did not duck or cover like a normal politician. He pulled out his own massive revolver and started shooting back. It is the only time in modern history that a head of state has personally engaged in a gunfight with their own assassins. He was so busy blasting away at the hitmen that he single-handedly drove the entire hit squad away. You have to respect a king who stays strapped. 11. Tsar Alexander II was targeted repeatedly, and one early attempt in 1879 hinged on a railway explosion. Conspirators planted explosives beneath the tracks, carefully timing the detonation for his train. The blast obliterated one carriage entirely. Celebrations broke out among the attackers. There was only one problem. The Tsar had changed cars at the last minute. The destroyed carriage carried luggage and supplies instead. The plan had been meticulous. The outcome was a catastrophic miscalculation. 12. Napoleon Bonaparte once survived a massive bomb blast simply because his carriage driver was incredibly drunk. In 1800, conspirators planted a barrel filled with explosives and shrapnel on a narrow street, timing the fuse to light up as Napoleon passed. It was a solid plan. However, Napoleon's driver, Caesar, had been drinking heavily that evening and was driving the horses furiously fast to show off. The carriage flew past the trap so quickly that the bomb exploded seconds too late, destroying a nearby building but leaving the emperor completely untouched. It is one of the only times in history where driving under the influence actually saved a life. 13. Vladimir Lenin was the leader of the Russian Revolution, but that did not impress a group of random Moscow bandits in 1919. Lenin was driving through the snow when a gang of armed men stopped his luxury vehicle. Lenin, assuming they were political enemies, prepared for the worst. He announced his identity, expecting it to mean something important. The bandits, who had zero interest in politics, basically said they did not care who he was, they just wanted the nice car. They kicked the leader of the Soviet Union out into the snow, took his wallet and his ride, and drove off, leaving the most powerful man in Russia to awkwardly walk home in the cold. 14. The Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, but his greatest defense against an assassin was simply ignoring him. In 1818, the Duke was riding in his carriage in Paris when an angry man ran up, pointed a pistol directly at him, and pulled the trigger. The bullet completely missed. But the funniest part is that Wellington was famously hard of hearing from years of standing next to roaring artillery cannons. He literally did not hear the gunshot, did not notice the panicked attacker running away, and only found out he had survived a hit when his staff informed him hours later. He successfully ignored an assassination attempt. 15. Charles de Gaulle survived what should have been a guaranteed ambush in 1962 when gunmen unleashed a storm of bullets into his Citroën sedan. Tires shredded, glass exploded. Over 100 rounds were fired. Yet the car's hydropneumatic suspension kept it stable, even on ruined wheels, allowing the driver to accelerate out of the kill zone. Investigators later said the engineering made the difference between a headline and a funeral. For once, advanced suspension outperformed military precision. 16. Benito Mussolini was a dictator who took himself very seriously, which makes the 1926 attempt on his life incredibly bizarre. An Irish aristocrat named Violet Gibson pushed through a crowd and fired a shot directly at his head. Just as she pulled the trigger, Mussolini suddenly turned his head to look at a band that had started playing a song. The bullet just harmlessly grazed the tip of his nose, leaving him with a scratch. Instead of panicking, he just slapped a large bandage on his nose and continued his parade like nothing happened. He literally turned up his nose at an assassination attempt. 17. Charles Guiteau, the man who shot President James Garfield, treated assassination like a PR campaign. When buying the revolver, he paid extra for the ivory-handled version because he believed it would look more distinguished in a future museum display. He genuinely expected crowds to admire it behind glass. He wasn't thinking about escape plans or consequences. He was thinking about lighting, presentation, and how history would frame him. It's the only time someone curated their own crime like an art exhibit. 18. Otto von Bismarck was known as the Iron Chancellor, but in 1866, he proved that nickname was literal. A student approached him on a Berlin street and fired 5 shots at point-blank range. Bismarck spun around and actually grabbed the attacker by the collar before soldiers intervened. By all laws of biology, Bismarck should have collapsed. Instead, he walked home and ate a hearty dinner. The bullets had grazed his ribs and harmlessly bounced off his thick winter coat. One bullet actually struck a rib and ricocheted away. He took 5 rounds to the torso and treated it like a mild annoyance, later telling his wife that his iron ribs had saved him. 19. King Louis IX of France experienced the only assassination attempt in history that was officially cancelled right in front of him. In the 13th century, the legendary leader of the assassins, known as the Old Man of the Mountain, dispatched 2 hitmen to eliminate the French king. But a few days later, he secured a sudden peace treaty with France. Realizing his killers were already on the way, he had to urgently send a second pair of agents to sprint across Europe, intercept the first 2, and literally call off the hit while standing inside the king's royal tent. Louis was completely terrified, then immediately incredibly relieved. 20. The conspiracy to attack Abraham Lincoln's cabinet was supposed to be a highly coordinated event, but one of the members literally drank himself out of the history books. George Atzerodt was assigned to go after the vice president at his hotel. It was a simple plan. Go to the hotel room, knock on the door, and attack. Instead, Atzerodt went to the hotel bar to get some liquid courage. He ordered a drink, then another, and then another. He got so hopelessly drunk that he completely forgot about his mission, lost his nerve, and just wandered off into the night. He was found the next day, hungover and confused, having failed simply because the bartender poured a heavy pour. 21. King Louis XV of France experienced a dramatic scare in 1757 when a man slipped past guards and stabbed him in the side at Versailles. Panic swept the palace. The king believed his reign was ending and immediately began issuing emotional apologies and confessions. Hours later, after layers of heavy fabric were removed, doctors discovered the wound was shallow and non-fatal. The monarch had prepared for death over what turned out to be a survivable injury. 22. In 1951, a young Prince Hussein of Jordan was walking beside his grandfather when a gunman opened fire. The attacker fatally struck the elder monarch, then aimed at Hussein. A bullet hit the prince directly in the chest but failed to penetrate. It had collided with a large metal pinned to his uniform that morning. The decoration absorbed enough impact to deflect the round. What looked like certain tragedy became a narrowly avoided second catastrophe. 23. In 1975, President Gerald Ford survived an intense encounter essentially because the attacker did not know how guns worked. Lynette Fromm, a former Colt member, approached Ford in a park in Sacramento and pulled out a massive Colt .45 pistol. She was less than an arm's length away. She pulled the trigger and nothing happened. Just a dull click. She had loaded the magazine with bullets, but completely forgot to rack the slide to put a round in the chamber. While the Secret Service wrestled her to the ground, she kept shouting that it did not go off, genuinely confused by the basic mechanical requirements of her own weapon. 24. During World War II, the Nazis tried to eliminate Winston Churchill with a weapon that sounds completely delicious. German agents designed steel explosives coated in a thin layer of rich, dark chocolate and packaged them in a premium candy wrapper. The plan was to smuggle them into the War Cabinet's dining room, where the breaking of the chocolate bar would trigger a massive detonation. It was a highly creative plan, but British spies discovered the plot before the candy ever crossed the channel. Intelligence officers actually had to issue an official warning to the public to watch out for unusually heavy chocolate bars, saving the Prime Minister from death by confectionery. 25. Simon Bolivar is famously known as the liberator of South America, but in 1828, he was liberated from a bedroom window by his girlfriend. Conspirators broke into the presidential palace in Bogotá at midnight, intending to eliminate him. Bolivar grabbed his sword and tried to open the door to fight them, which would have been a terrible idea. His lover physically stopped him, dragged him to the window, and forced him to jump out into the cold, dark street. She then closed the window and calmly went to face the attackers, lying to them to buy time. Bolivar survived by hiding under a muddy bridge in his nightgown, shivering but very much alive. 26. Secretary of State William Seward survived an 1865 assassination attempt simply because of a bad driving record. The same night Abraham Lincoln was targeted, an attacker broke into Seward's bedroom and struck him with a heavy knife. However, Seward had recently been thrown from his carriage and was wearing a thick, rigid metal splint around his jaw and neck to heal his broken bones. The attacker's blade just hopelessly scraped against the iron collar, sparking in the dark, completely failing to cause any harm. He literally survived a highly planned political hit because he was already in a full-body cast. 27. In 1940, a heavily armed squad stormed Leon Trotsky's residence in Mexico under cover of darkness. They fired hundreds of rounds through walls and windows, shredding furniture and splintering doors. The volume of gunfire suggested absolute certainty. But Trotsky and his wife had already slid beneath a thick wooden bed at the first sign of intrusion. When the attackers retreated, convinced of success, they left behind destruction instead of their target. Precision was replaced by overconfidence. 28. The Rye House plot of 1683 was a masterclass in terrible timing. A group of conspirators planned an elaborate ambush to eliminate King Charles II of England as he traveled back from the horse races. They had the weapons, a secret hideout, and the perfect choke point on a narrow countryside road. It was practically foolproof. However, a massive fire accidentally broke out in the town where the king was staying. Annoyed by the smoke and the ruined buildings, the king just packed his bags and rode back to London a week early. When the attackers finally arrived to set up their deadly trap, the king was already safely drinking tea in his palace. 29. Queen Elizabeth I survived the most passive-aggressive assassination attempt of the 16th century. A man named Edward Squire was recruited by foreign agents to eliminate the queen using a bizarre chemical weapon. His master plan was to secretly rub a toxic potion onto the handle of her horse's saddle, hoping she would touch the poison and perish. He successfully sneaked into the royal stables and smeared the saddle with the deadly sludge. Unfortunately for him, It was a very chilly day in London. The Queen simply wore thick riding gloves the entire time, completely ignoring the toxic hazard and riding off with zero health issues. 30. Emperor Nero of Rome wanted to eliminate his own mother, Agrippina, but he wanted it to look like a tragic nautical accident. He commissioned his engineers to build a lavish, self-sinking party boat. The ceiling of the main cabin was loaded with heavy lead weights designed to crash down and trap her on command. When the trap was sprung, the ceiling collapsed exactly as planned. But the dining sofa Agrippina was resting on had a high, sturdy back that perfectly caught the falling lead. The boat then broke apart and sank, but Agrippina just calmly swam to shore, extremely annoyed at her son for ruining her evening cruise. 31. The gunpowder plot of 1605 is legendary, but the reason it failed is pure workplace comedy. Guy Fawkes and his crew spent months secretly packing 36 barrels of explosives under the House of Lords to eliminate King James I. It was the ultimate stealth mission until one of the conspirators felt bad for his brother-in-law. He sent a mysterious letter basically saying that he should probably take a sick day tomorrow because something big was going down. The letter was so incredibly obvious that it was immediately handed over to the authorities, ruining months of secret planning just because one guy could not keep a secret. 32. King Mithridates. The Sixth of Pontus holds the record for the only monarch to accidentally assassinate Proof himself. Terrified of being poisoned by his enemies, the king spent decades ingesting tiny, non-lethal doses of various toxins to build up an immunity. His paranoia was completely successful, which became a massive problem in 63 BC. When he was finally overthrown and surrounded by enemies, he tried to dramatically end his reign by drinking a highly potent vial of poison. Nothing happened. His immune system just easily processed the toxins, leaving him completely healthy, extremely awkward, and forced to just embarrassingly surrender to the invading army. 33. Emperor Pedro II of Brazil was so incredibly relaxed that he did not even realize he was under attack. In 1889, a disgruntled young man approached the emperor's carriage outside a theater in Rio de Janeiro. He pulled out a revolver and fired a shot directly at the monarch. The bullet missed completely, and the furious crowd immediately tackled the gunman to the cobblestones. When the royal guards rushed over to inform the emperor that a man had just tried to strike him, Pedro simply looked mildly confused, remarked on what an absolutely terrible shot the guy was, and calmly went back to his evening stroll. 34. Queen Victoria survived at least 7 attacks during her reign, but the one in 1842 was less of a threat and more of a bad prank. A young man who just wanted attention waited for the royal carriage and fired a pistol directly at the queen. The crowd screamed, but the queen was completely unharmed. It turns out the pistol was not loaded with a bullet. It was loaded with paper, gunpowder, and a large amount of tobacco. He did not actually try to strike the queen. He tried to aggressively smoke her out. The court was so confused by the bizarre stunt that they could only charge him with misdemeanor assault. 35. Sultan Abdul Hamid. The second of the Ottoman Empire survived a massive explosion in 1905 just because he was feeling chatty. Conspirators planted a huge explosive in a carriage outside his mosque, perfectly timing the fuse to detonate the exact moment the Sultan usually walked out the doors. They had monitored his exact routine for weeks. However, on that exact day, the Sultan stopped on the mosque steps to have a brief, unexpected conversation with a local religious leader. Those 2 extra minutes of small talk completely threw off the timeline, causing the trap to trigger before he even reached the stairs. 36. Abraham Lincoln once survived a sniper shot, not because of armor or guards, but because of geometry. In 1864, riding alone to his summer cottage, a bullet sliced clean through his tall stovepipe hat, missing his skull by inches. Most leaders would lock down the city. Lincoln simply picked up the hat, inspected the hole, and kept riding. Later, when staff demanded action, he reportedly brushed it off as bad aim. The hat was destroyed. His schedule wasn't. 37. King George III proved that the best reaction to a bullet is simply taking a nap. In 1800, the king walked into the royal box at a London theater. Just as the crowd stood to applaud, an attacker stood up in the front row and fired a pistol directly at his head. The king calmly stepped back, letting the bullet hit the wooden pillar beside him. Instead of fleeing the building in terror, George simply bowed to the screaming audience, sat down in his velvet chair, and ordered the actors to start the play. He was so incredibly unbothered that he actually fell asleep during the second act. 38. The Gowrie Conspiracy of 1600 is absolute proof that being an assassin requires at least some basic bravery. Conspirators lured King James VI of Scotland into a high tower room, locking the door behind him. Inside the room was an armed man holding a dagger, instructed to eliminate the king. However, the hired killer was so incredibly nervous about harming a royal that he completely froze and refused to move. The king, realizing his attacker was terrified, literally grabbed the man, dragged him to the window, and yelled out for his guards. The hitman essentially surrendered to his own victim without throwing a single punch. 39. Sometimes the only thing standing between an attacker and their target is basic city infrastructure. In 1906, an anarchist decided to crash the wedding parade of King Alfonso XIII of Spain. He threw a massive explosive hidden inside a beautiful bouquet of flowers directly at the royal carriage from a high balcony. It was perfectly aimed. However, the attacker completely failed to notice the electric tram wires running right above the street. The heavy floral trap hit the wire, hilariously bounced backward like a tennis ball, and exploded away from the carriage. The king survived simply because public transportation got in the way. 40. George Washington defeated the entire British Empire, but he almost lost his life to a plate of side dishes. In 1776, a member of his own guard tried to eliminate the general by sneaking a toxic powder into his favorite meal of fresh green peas. Luckily, Washington's housekeeper caught on to the plot and warned him right before dinner. Instead of making a dramatic military scene, Washington calmly tossed the suspicious vegetables out the window into the yard. A group of chickens immediately ate the peas and fell over, instantly proving the grand conspiracy and saving the founding father from a culinary disaster. 41. When it comes to presidential security, nothing beats the incredible power of basic manners. President William Howard Taft survived a 1909 security breach just by having very polite bodyguards. Taft was walking with the president of Mexico when a man holding a concealed palm pistol managed to slip through the crowd. He was just steps away from the leaders. A Texas Ranger and a Mexican agent spotted the man simultaneously. Instead of tackling him and causing a massive stampede, they simply walked up to him, smiled, and politely asked him to hand over the weapon. Confused by their friendly attitude, the man just gave it to them. 42. Future Tsar. Nicholas II of Russia survived an 1891 attack in Japan thanks to a piece of bamboo. A local police officer suddenly drew his sword and swung it directly at the young royal's head. Before the attacker could land a blow, Nicholas's cousin, Prince George of Greece, jumped into action. George did not have a weapon, so he just swung his wooden walking stick with all his might, perfectly parrying the heavy steel blade like a professional fencer. The attacker was knocked down, and a simple wooden cane successfully defeated a masterfully crafted weapon in a matter of seconds. 43. The stealthiest ninja assassins in history can still be defeated by a light sleeper. The legendary Japanese ruler Toyotomi Hideyoshi foiled a brilliant plot using the power of just opening his eyes. A famous ninja was hired to eliminate the warlord. He crawled into the attic right above the ruler's bed, drilled a tiny hole in the ceiling, and slowly lowered a piece of thread. His master plan was to drip a lethal liquid down the string directly into the warlord's open mouth. It was incredibly stealthy until Hideyoshi woke up, noticed a weird string dangling above his face, and just casually called his guards to arrest the guy. 44. Grigory Rasputin's reputation for being difficult to eliminate was fueled by one particularly chaotic evening. Conspirators attempted to poison him with cyanide-laced food and wine, expecting a swift collapse. Instead, he showed no immediate reaction, forcing them to improvise. Accounts differ on the exact chemistry involved, but the poison failed to produce the instant result they anticipated. The night spiraled into confusion, escalating far beyond the original plan and cementing his near-mythical endurance in popular history. 44 times, history stood inches from rewriting itself and lost to a jammed trigger, a wrong train car, or a conversation that lasted too long. Now here's the real test. Which failed attempt did we miss that deserves to be on this list? Not the obvious one, the truly absurd one. Drop it in the comments and explain why it belongs here. And if you made it this far, like the video and subscribe, because history gets even stranger the deeper we dig.